Hey, what's going on, everyone? Mr. Klein here. This is part one of Age of Jackson. This is our presentation over Andrew Jackson and kind of his role as president of the United States, and kind of the things that he did as president. So Andrew Jackson, just to kind of talk about real quick, is a pretty polarizing figure when it comes to the United States and the presidents. There's a lot of people that really think he did a lot of really good things, and there's some things a lot of people didn't think he did a lot of really bad things, right? So we're going to kind of talk about what he did and kind of what are some things that as president he did to make sure the country stayed together, and what are some things that he did that really put a really dark spot on his legacy as president. So let's kind of talk about who Andrew Jackson was. So he was born in the Carolinas during the Revolutionary War. So he grew up during this time of the country becoming its own, right? So breaking away from the British and becoming its own country from there. He did a lot of things before he became president. First off, he was very poor as a family starting out. So he really worked his way through the whole rags to riches kind of story when you think about that. He became a lawyer. He also was a U.S. representative, so he was a member of the House of Representatives. He was a senator, and he served on the Supreme Court for the state of Tennessee. So the judicial branch for the state of Tennessee is who he worked for. So he did a lot of really worked his way up to becoming who he was. And that's going to play a role when we talk about a little bit earlier of why people really liked him a lot. We know that he was a general during the War of 1812. His most famous battle was the Battle of New Orleans. We all know that from the War of 1812 is the most famous battle, most important battle for the U.S., even though it happens after the treaty again is signed and the War of 1812 is officially over. This still is a huge victory, huge moral boost for the United States. It really sets the United States on a way of having a lot of nationalism as the years go on. So now let's talk about Andrew Jackson and the War of 1812, the election of 1824. Right. So there's three big players in this election. You have John Quincy Adams, you have Andrew Jackson, and you have Henry Clay. So let's talk about what happens during this election. So first off, Jackson actually wins the popular vote. So that means that the majority of the Americans that live in the United States voted for Andrew Jackson. However, he did not have enough electoral votes to win the presidency. So remember, for the president, we have a special way of electing them where each state has a set number of electoral votes, and whoever's running for president must have majority of those votes in order to win the presidency. So Jackson, even though he won the popular vote, he did not win enough electoral votes to win the presidency. So in that case, what we know from what we talked about in the past is if there's no winner with the Electoral College, the decision is sent to the House of Representatives. And this is where Henry Clay comes in. So Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House for the House of Representatives. We've talked about him a whole lot so far about, the things that he's done, being, the great compromiser and coming up with ways of making sure that the country stayed intact. So the rumor is that Henry Clay helped Quincy Adams win the election. So John Quincy Adams was actually selected to be the sixth president of the United States. And so even though Jackson won the popular vote, and what we'll see here in a second, he actually won the most electoral votes, the House of Representatives still choose John Quincy Adams to be the next president of the United States. So everyone's trying to figure out why in the world is John Quincy Adams president when clearly Jackson is the one that the majority of the American people wanted to be president. So this whole idea of this bargain comes up between John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. And so what people were saying is that John Quincy Adams promised Henry Clay something in return to make sure that he is president. No one's just really sure of what it is, but people think there is a bargain. They start calling it the corrupt bargain. And this is actually solidified when Clay actually becomes the Secretary of State for John Quincy Adams. So a lot of people think that John Quincy Adams promised Henry Clay a position on his cabinet if he made it sure that John Quincy Adams becomes the next president of the United States. This sends people that support Jackson in an uproar. People are upset because they're saying this is the elite helping the elite. Our voice is not being heard. Most people want to hit Jackson to be president, and now he's not president. And so this plays a major role, which we're going to talk about here in a second. This idea of what does democracy look like in the United States. So I'm not going to go over these questions. I just want to kind of talk about what this map is. So you can see this is the election of 1824. Excuse me. And what you can see is that Andrew Jackson won the popular vote by quite a bit. He had 43% of the popular vote. The next closest was John Quincy Adams with 31%. And so Jackson won the popular vote by a lot. And then you look at the electoral vote. Also, Jackson won the electoral vote with 38% of the vote. However, you have to have a majority, not the most. So you can see that he did win the popular vote and did have the most electoral votes. You also see Henry Clay, who's in the orange there on the map, also ran for president. And so a lot of people think that's what kind of fueled the whole idea of John Quincy Adams getting this corrupt bargain with Henry Clay. And so this is where we have the jumping off point of what does democracy look like for the United States? And so we get to this idea of expanding democracy. What should democracy look like here on out? So a lot of people are upset with this election of 1824 because a lot of people think Jackson should win. So a lot of people felt like they were being left behind, right? They were being cut off from helping with the government. And it's a small group of people that are becoming wealthier and getting more political power through politics and running for offices and getting jobs there. And so this idea is like, we're not really a democracy. We're more of an oligarchy. And what an oligarchy means is you have a few people that are running the government, right? And that's kind of what people start feeling like, even though it's supposed to be everyone gets a vote, and we'll talk about it here in a second. What does it mean to vote? But it seems like it's up to the small elite wealthy people that make the decisions, which is not democracy at all, right? And that's what kind of a lot of people are going over there. So after Jackson's defeat in 1824, a lot of people rally behind them and they're ready for him to run in 1828. They're trying to think, what can we do to make sure that Jackson wins in 1828? Legally, right? So we don't do anything illegal there, but what can we do to make sure that Jackson runs for president and actually wins this time? And so he had this sentiment of being the defending the rights of the common man, right? He grew up poor, like we just talked about, worked his way up through things, and we'll talk about that idea here again with the election of 1828. But we see this, he is for the common people. He's for the majority of the people in the United States, not just the small, wealthy people that seem to be running the government at this time. So what happens is that states change the qualifications on how to vote and who ran for office. So if you remember, we talked about all the way back in colonization that there are 3 requirements for you to be able to vote in the colonies in the United States. The first one is that you had to be a male. The second one, you had to be white. And the third one is that you had to own property. And so that becomes a big pushing point, is what can we change to make sure that we have more people that are able to vote. And so what the states do is that they either lower or they get rid of completely the requirement to own property to vote or run for office. So those 3 requirements, the third one there, owning land, owning property, is gone. So now you have to be white and you have to be male. Now this does not expand the voting rights for everybody, right? So women are still not allowed to vote at this time if you are not white. So you're a person of a different ethnic background or a different race, you cannot vote either. So you had to be white and you had to be male. However, this does expand to having more people being able to vote or run for office, right? And so this land requirement's gone, or you only had to have a certain amount of land. This took this power from the elites, the really big landowners, the wealthy landowners, and now we're expanding it to where we have more common people getting a chance to vote, which if you think about democracy, that's the way it should be, right? We should be expanding those things as we go through. However, just remember that you still have to be white, you still have to be male. So there's still large sections of the United States, not people in the United States, not being represented at the polls and in office and things like that. The other thing that happens is that political parties, instead of just picking someone to run for an office, they have nominating conventions. And so what that means is that all these people would gather up together and for their party, and they would say, we're going to vote on these candidates to run for our political party for office. So for example, say for president, we have so many people that want to be president. We're going to, for our political party, we're going to leave it up to a vote, and everyone's going to vote, and whoever wins that vote is the one that we're going to nominate to become our person that runs for the president of the United States. And so this is a big change because usually it was political leaders that decide this. So like, for example, we'll use the Federalists because they don't exist anymore. Hamilton, right? Hamilton was the leader of the Federalist Party. So him and a couple other leaders, if someone's running for president or they're running for senator or House representative, they would choose who they wanted to run. So you think about that, right? You're going to have, their buddies are the ones that are going to run, or, someone that's wealthy is going to run. They're not going to pick someone that's a farmer that's, working all the time. They're not going to pick them, right? They're going to pick their buddies. They're going to pick people that are really close to. And so they flip the script and have nominating conventions instead. This expands democracy again, right? So more voices are being heard in the process of getting the candidate they want to be, whatever office that they're running for. What we call this expansion is called the Jacksonian democracy. And so this expansion of dropping the requirement for to have property, or shrinking it, or having a convention where all these people get together, they nominate who they want to run for their political party. All those things are changing to expand who gets to have a voice in the government. Okay, so this is a huge shift. We're expanding that idea of the power to the people, right? So who gets to make the final decision on those things? That gets us to the election of 1828. So you tell about the map right there. We have a huge shift in what happens with the votes. So remember, John Quincy Adams is the sitting president, so he's running again. Jackson decides, you know what, I'm going to run, and so I'm going to try to go against Quincy Adams one more time. And so their platforms, as they're running for the president of the United States, focus on certain things. Jackson's he was a war hero, right? He fought in the Battle of New Orleans, the best victory against the British during the War of 1812. He grew up poor, right? He grew up during the Revolutionary War. He worked his way through all this hard work to get where he is now. He's not just hand this to him like John Quincy Adams was, because his dad was a founding father, right? His dad was a president, so this was already offered to him. Jackson had to work hard for these things. And this is addressed to the common people, right? Majority of your people are going to be your farmers, your poor people in the United States. And so you want to make sure that you're addressing and people feel like you're going to represent them. And Jackson had that support from those people. With Adams, they said he was out of touch. The quote that they used for him is that he's as cold as a lump of ice, which is pretty good insult back in that time, right? So just saying that, he was standoffish, he didn't really talk to people. He had this arrogance about him, and, and it doesn't bode well if, they're supposed to represent the people of the United States. Jackson represents the people of the United States, is what his campaign was saying. On the other side, Quincy Adams, they said that Jackson was hot-tempered, right? He was crude. He was not equipped to be president. He doesn't have the same education like John Quincy Adams does. He doesn't understand, the things that we need to understand for that. And so that's where we see a big change with him. He was hot-tempered. Believe me, he fought in a ton of duels. One of the reasons why a lot of people think, he died is because he had a bullet lodged in his body and just slowly fed him lead and poisoned him until his last days. It was just crazy to think about, right? So he did have a hot temper. They're not lying about that. However, that campaign platform did not work very well. And after all the votes, Jackson wins both the popular vote and the electoral college. So you look at our map over there on the right, you can see he wins 68% of the electoral votes and 56% of the popular votes at this time. And so John Quincy Adams, just like his father, serves one term as president, and now it's Andrew Jackson's turn to become the president of the United States. So what does that mean for Jackson? So after his inauguration, so when you're inaugurated, means that's where you take the oath of office to become president. So what does he do? Well, first off, they think this is a huge victory for the common person, right? We finally got our man in there. This expansion of democracy, we just talked about that. Jacksonian democracy is working for us, right? Now we get to see our fruits of our labor with Jackson being president of the United States. So what happens after he's inaugurated is that Jackson, because the people that helped support him and got him a chance to become president again, he gives them government jobs. We call that the spoils system. Okay, all that really means is that it's the practice of giving people jobs who help during your campaign. This happens all the time nowadays, right? So whoever becomes president, right, the people that really help them become the president of the United States, they'll give them a job in the government, whether that's, chief of staff, or maybe it's ambassador to France, where you go over and you are the representative for the United States in France, right? All these things can go to you. But this is a spoil system, right? So Jackson does this. He rewards the people that helped him make it to the White House, and now he's rewarding them for that. He also creates his cabinet with people he trusted. So remember, cabinets like Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, those things like that, right? To help him make decisions on what's best for the United States. Remember, presidents are not always going to be an expert in every single thing. That's impossible, right? Like, I know a lot about social studies, don't know a whole lot about math, right? I'll tell everyone that, right? I think I can do math, but I can't teach math, right? It's the thing with presidents, right? Jackson might be really good at, wartime, strategies and stuff like that. So, but he might not be very good with, represent foreign policy with different countries. So he's going to lean on those people that help him make those decisions the best. He also had an informal group of advisors, right? So you can only have so many people in your cabinet. And so he has an informal group, and their nickname is the Kitchen Cabinet. So what that means is that they would literally call it Kitchen Cabinet because they meet in the White House kitchen and would, talk about things, discuss things, right? Just like a normal conversation, be like, hey, this stuff's going on. What do you think about this, right? Or, hey, Britain's asking us to sign this treaty. What do you think about that, right? And so this was an informal thing. It wasn't anything official. It was just him, using his people that he trusted to help him make decisions, right? So this is kind of what happens when Jackson becomes president, right? He gives people jobs in the spoil system to help him during his campaign. Then he has an informal group of advisors called the Kitchen Cabinet to help him make decisions, make it a little bit easier for him. All right, let's get into a big part of this. So we're going to take a step back from Jackson for just a second and talk about what is going on in the United States at this time. So we've talked about this before, this idea of sectionalism, right? So this idea of like having pride or being prideful of region you live in the United States. So for us, the big one is the North and the South. We've talked about this for months and months, that this divide starts all the way back when we talk about colonization, which we're going to talk about here in a second why that is, right? But there are three main regions. We're going to talk about those regions are and kind of what we see the difference between those regions, especially the North and the South. So let's start with the North. So the North, their economy is based on manufacturing, right? This goes, like I said, all the way back to colonial times. We don't have a lot of farming. There's not a very fertile soil. It's very rocky. Got a lot of mountains. Got a lot of hills. So it made it hard to farm. So they had to find a way to make money. Right? And one of those ways is manufacturing, right? So taking raw materials, turning them into something else, right? So if you have a piece of wood, right? Instead of just selling that wood, we're going to turn it into a table. We're going to turn it into a chair, or we're going to turn it into a house or, that kind of stuff, right? So we're using that material and we're changing it to something different. So we have factories and things like that in this area. They also supported tariffs. Remember, tariffs are a tax on imported goods. And what this is supposed to do is help you compete with other countries, right? So for example, British, they have all these factories just like the North does. So what we'll do, we'll put a tariff on those goods coming from Britain to make it more expensive. All right, so we're getting a tax off that already. So that tax gets passed on to the consumer. So the good becomes more expensive. And now the North, their good is that they make that's exactly the same as the one for Britain. It's cheaper. And so people are going to buy your goods more, right? So for example, say that we're making a chair. Okay, we're going to put a tariff on chairs from Britain. So what that means is say that chairs are both $1 with a tariff. Now the British good is $1.50 because the tariff was 50 cents. Now the British chair is $1.50. The American chair is $1. People are more likely to buy the American chair than the British chair. And so the North liked that because it gave them a chance to compete because they're still growing their manufacturing, unlike Britain, where they've been doing this for quite some time. The other thing, they did not like selling federal land cheap. Okay, they felt like this is not good when it comes to the ideas of slavery and things like that, because people are going to go out there, buy a whole bunch of land, set up plantations, and it makes it really difficult to abolish slavery, right? So the North is pretty much against slavery at this time, right? So slavery starting to go away. There we learned that with the Missouri Compromise. The South, exact opposite of the North, right? The economy is based on farming. It goes all the way back to colonial times, right? The cash crops at this time are cotton and tobacco. So the tobacco is still a huge seller for the United States, and now cotton's starting to become one. Now, back in the colonial times, cotton was not a huge cash crop. But as we get through manufacturing, learning how to make clothes and different items like that, cotton becomes a huge cash crop for the South, right? So those are the big ones that we have there. They imported most of their manufactured goods. So when we talk about importing, they're not bringing it from the South. They're not getting it from the North. They're getting it from a different country. So what that means is that they did not like tariffs, right? Because they did not want their goods to be more expensive. Okay, they wanted to buy the British goods, but they didn't want to be, 50 cents more expensive, like the example that we used earlier. So they did not like that idea of tariffs, which we'll talk about on part 2 there. They relied on slavery for their economy, right? And so we talk about, the labor that was going on in the South. It was predominantly African Americans that were doing the work at this time. And so this was a huge divide between the North and the South, right? We talk about, we go back to the Articles of Confederation and those territories in the Northwest Ordinance, in the Northwest Territory. One of their stipulations was if they want to become a state, they had to not have slavery in those territories. Okay, even though the Articles of Confederations are gone, in each of those territories or states' constitutions, slavery is banned. So the North, as those states were becoming, as those territories were becoming states, slavery was not there. The North starts abolishing slavery, which gets rid of because there's no need for slavery in the North, right? Manufacturing was the main job. And so this divide becomes a huge one between the North and the South. And we're going to start seeing the lead up to the Civil War based on these things. So the West is the other region. This is like the uncharted territory of the world. It's a beginning economy. So there is, it's, small stuff, mostly farming, right? That's a big thing in the West, different kind of farming that you want. They wanted cheap land because they liked the land and the infrastructure. They wanted to be built out that way. And so like getting technology like railroads and stuff, getting through there, be able to get people to move to the West. We're going to start seeing happening as we go further and further along. But sectionalism becomes a huge part of Andrew Jackson's presidency and the presidents after him, and which eventually leads up to the Civil War. So this idea of the North and the South not liking each other because of these things does happen as we go a little bit further along. Okay, so that is part 1. All right, so that gives you through a little bit about Jackson and kind of what was going on during his life and early on as his presidency. Part 2, we're going to talk about some of the things where he keeps the United States together. But then also, we're going to talk about some of his, the really bad things that happened during his presidency. All right, I'll catch you all later, part 2.